The museum basement was a place no one wanted to work. Its air was thick with mildew, its walls stained with time, and its shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten manuscripts and worm-eaten books. Dust floated like ghosts, disturbed only by the quiet steps of Mateo Alvarez, the archivist no one remembered hiring, and few bothered to greet. He was invisible to the professors who lectured upstairs, the students rushing between exhibits, the donors who toasted champagne in marble halls. And that suited him. Mateo had always been a man of silence, of patience, of secrets. On that sweltering afternoon, when the buzzing of fluorescent lights above was the only sound, Mateo slid a box across a metal table. It had been mislabeled, tucked among colonial church records. Inside, beneath brittle parchments, was something that did not belong, a stack of discolored bark pages, bound by fraying cords. He froze, his breath caught. This was no missionary diary, no Spanish census. This was far older, infinitely rarer. He recognized the faint traces of glyphs, curved, looping, jagged shapes like claws of memory scratching through time. A Mayan Codex. His hands trembled. Only a handful of these ancient books had survived the fires of conquest and the rot of centuries. Scholars across the world would kill for a fragment, a single page. And here was one forgotten, abandoned, decaying under his fingertips. He leaned closer, every nerve alive with awe and fear. The ink was fading, the fibers cracking like fragile bones. One wrong breath could shatter it into dust. But as his eyes traveled the glyphs, he felt something stirring inside him, a recognition deeper than logic. He could almost hear a voice whispering through the symbols. Not forgotten, he thought. Not yet. His childhood returned to him like a flame in the darkness. A small boy, sitting by the fire, his grandmother's friend, an old Mayan elder named Ixchel, tracing glyphs in the dirt. Most dismissed her as a relic of folklore. But Mateo had listened, absorbed, memorized. She had told him stories of gods and kings, of jaguars prowling the underworld, of cities swallowed by vines. She had insisted that every mark carried not just sound, but spirit. And now, staring at this codex, Mateo realized those nights were no child's fancy. They had prepared him for this moment. The opening page spoke of rivers winding like serpents, of mountains crowned with flame, of a city whose walls gleamed with the sun's own bones. He whispered the words aloud, in broken cadence. And even in that dim basement, they shimmered with menace and promise. Gold. The codex spoke of a place where gold was not just wealth, but worship. A city hidden, protected, destined to vanish until the right eyes could see. His heart pounded like drums of war. If this is real, Mateo thought, gripping the edge of the table, then everything changes. The histories, the maps, the arrogance of those who think they already know. He imagined the professors upstairs, their condescending smiles, their endless dismissals of his quiet suggestions. He imagined their laughter if he showed them this codex. They would call it a forgery, a fantasy, the delusion of a basement clerk. But deep inside, Mateo knew. He could feel the truth bleeding through every glyph. The codex was no myth. It was a key. The pages rattled under his breath as he turned them. One contained a map, crude, symbolic, but unmistakable. Rivers, stars, a path leading into the heart of the jungle. His pulse quickened, sweat running down his temple. He knew what this meant. A discovery like this would make him a target, a fool, or a legend. In that instant, he felt both fear and exhilaration. The codex demanded something of him. To ignore it would be to betray everything he had been unknowingly preparing for. To follow it would mean ridicule, danger, perhaps even death. Yet his quiet soul whispered, "You are the one meant to see this, no one else." Mateo gently closed the codex, slid it back into its box, and pressed the lid shut with shaking hands. Above his head, laughter echoed faintly from the university hall, arrogance untouched by the weight of history sleeping below. He straightened his shoulders, his eyes burning with a fire no one had seen before. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Halvorson's life. And with that, the archivist carried the box out of the shadows, the air around him heavy with destiny. The forgotten city was waiting. Matteo worked in silence long after the sun had set. The museum above had emptied, the echo of students' chatter replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights. Alone in the basement, he spread the codex across the table as if laying out a sacred body. The pages smelled of earth and smoke, as though they had carried fire through centuries. Every crease, every glyph, every faded stroke called to him like an unfinished song. He leaned closer, whispering the symbols under his breath. The language pulsed in his mind, not just as words but as visions. Rivers winding like veins across green jungles, mountains rising like clenched fists, a serpent devouring the sun. Matteo's heart raced, for within these images lay the clue he had both dreaded and yearned for: gold. The passage was written in layers, hidden beneath metaphors, but he knew the old style. He remembered Ixchel, the elder who had once tapped her finger against his forehead and said, "You have a door in here, Niño. Someday, the ancestors will knock." And now they had. One phrase repeated itself across several pages, as though carved by insistence: Kin Bak'al, city of the sun's bones. Matteo traced it with his finger, his skin prickling. "Bones of the sun," he murmured. Not metaphor. Gold. The city was said to be lined with it, not stolen trinkets, not scattered offerings, but walls, temples, monuments shimmering like dawn itself. He sat back, trembling. If true, this was not just another ruin. It would be the greatest discovery of the century. But even greater than the treasure was the knowledge. Proof that the Mayan chronicles of grandeur, so often dismissed as myth, had roots in living memory. Matteo's mind churned with possibility. But then came the shadow of doubt. He remembered the smirks of professors, the way his suggestions were brushed aside as romantic nonsense. He could already hear their laughter. A basement clerk chasing El Dorado fairy tales. His chest tightened with humiliation. Still, he pressed on, his eyes devouring every glyph. A crude map took shape before him. It spoke of rivers, two serpents that converged near a jaguar-shaped mountain. Beneath that mountain, the codex promised, the bones of the sun sleep. His pulse quickened. He knew the river systems of the Yucatan. He had catalogued dozens of expedition journals during his years in the archives. The shapes matched. The codex was not allegory. It was a guide. Could it be? He whispered, gripping the edges of the table. The thought of discovery clashed with fear. If he followed this, he could be ridiculed, branded a fool. Or worse, if treasure hunters caught wind, it could lead to looting, violence, destruction. The archivist closed his eyes. What do I do? The answer came not from reason, but from memory. Ixchel's voice, soft and insistent. To see truth is a burden, but to ignore it is a betrayal. Matteo opened his eyes. Steady now. He would not betray the truth. He began copying symbols onto fresh parchment, his hand steady, his heart aflame. The codex spoke of gold, yes, but more than that, of honor, of forgotten ancestors demanding to be heard. Matteo knew that once he stepped out of the basement with this knowledge, his life would no longer be quiet. Upstairs, footsteps echoed faintly, professors leaving a late meeting. He imagined their disdain, their careless arrogance. They had dismissed him before, but they would not forever. Not once. Kin Bak'al rose again from the shadows. Matteo leaned forward, speaking aloud as though to seal the vow. I will find it. I will prove it. The crumbling codex whispered back, its silence heavy, its promise eternal. The lecture hall was bright with arrogance. Polished wooden benches gleamed under chandeliers, and the air buzzed with laughter that dripped like poison. Matteo sat at the back, the codex notes tucked carefully inside a leather folder. His hands sweated against the paper, but his resolve held steady. Today, he would present the truth. Today, they would finally listen. Professor Halvorsen, a towering man with a beard like stone and a voice that could shatter glass, presided at the podium. He was everything Matteo was not. Loud, celebrated, and adored by his students. Halvorsen thrived on spectacle, turning archaeology into theater. He had once told a room full of donors, the Mayans built myths, not empires. Gold cities? Fairy tales for dreamers. The audience had roared with approval. Matteo had burned with quiet shame. Now, clutching his folder, he stood. His voice cracked at first, but he forced it steady. I believe, he began, that a codex recently found in our archives points to a lost Mayan city, Kin Bak'al. The glyphs are consistent. The geography aligns with river systems still traceable. It is. The room erupted before he could finish. Laughter, sharp and cruel, rippled through the benches. One student cupped his hands and called, El Dorado, is it? Another mimicked, next he'll tell us the jungle sings to him. The hall howled. Professor Halvorsen leaned on the podium, smirking. Mr. Alvarez, he said, his tone dripping disdain, you are an archivist, not an archaeologist. Please, leave the discoveries to those of us who trained for them. His words landed like blows, and the room cackled louder. Matteo's cheeks burned, but he stood his ground. With respect, Professor, I can read glyphs, you cannot. I was taught as a child by… Ah! Halvorsen interrupted, raising his eyebrows theatrically. By a fireside storyteller, no doubt, very scholarly. The audience roared again. The archivist's throat ached, yet his eyes gleamed with something deeper than hurt. Rage simmered under his calm exterior, but so did conviction. He remembered Ixchel's hands in the dirt, tracing glyphs with reverence. She had given him a gift these professors could not measure by their degrees. Halvorsen strutted down from the podium, closing the distance. He plucked the folder from Matteo's hands and flipped it open with mock ceremony. Let's see what myths we have today. He held up the copied glyphs for the hall. Rivers as serpents, mountains as jaguars. Poetry, nothing more. He snapped the folder shut and shoved it back at him. Do yourself a favor, Alvarez, Halvorsen said coldly, his face inches away. Stay in the basement where you belong. The world of discovery is not for dreamers. The hall fell silent for a moment, the cruelty of the words sinking in. Then came the laughter again, a tidal wave of mockery. Matteo stood frozen, his stomach twisting, his ears ringing. But inside him, something shifted. Their laughter no longer mattered. Their ridicule no longer chained him. He saw them clearly now, not scholars, not seekers of truth, but guardians of their own pride. He turned and walked out, the laughter echoing behind him. Each step grew steadier. They had mocked him, dismissed him, tried to bury him, but truth did not need their permission to exist. As he pushed open the doors to the night air, a thought crystallized. If they will not walk with me, then I will walk alone. The codex was his compass. The jungle awaited. And somewhere, beyond the rivers and mountains, Kin Bak'al was waiting to rise. Matteo lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment. The echoes of laughter still rattled in his skull, each jeer from the lecture hall replaying like a cruel refrain. He turned the humiliation over in his mind. The sting of Professor Halvorsen's words sharp as a blade. Stay in the basement where you belong. But as the city outside slipped into silence, another voice rose inside him, stronger, steadier. Ixchel's. He could almost see her again, the Mayan elder who had shaped his childhood more than he realized. Her hut had smelled of burning copal and earth after rain. Her hair, long and silver, had been braided with strands of red thread. To the villagers, she was just an eccentric old woman, but to Matteo, she was a guardian of secrets. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, watching her draw glyphs with the tip of a stick. The firelight made the symbols dance, alive with meaning. These are not dead words, she had whispered. pressing his small hand over the lines. They breathe. They wait for someone to listen. She had shown him the glyph for sun, a circle with 4 points, then bone, sharp as a fang. When she combined them, her eyes gleamed. Kin Bak'al, she had said softly. The city of the sun's bones. It waits, hidden, until one who remembers can find it again. That memory surged now, filling Mateo's chest with something more powerful than shame. The professors could laugh, the world could doubt, but he remembered. He had been chosen long before he understood why. His quiet years in the basement had not been wasted. They were preparation. Mateo rose from his bed and pulled the codex notes from his satchel. He spread them across the table, tracing each line as if Ixchel herself were guiding his hand. The Jaguar Mountain, the twin rivers, the stars aligned like spears of light. Piece by piece, the map took shape, not metaphor, but direction. He muttered aloud, the glyphs spilling like incantations. 2 rivers, they meet here. Jaguar Mountain to the south. And here lies Kin Bak'al. His pulse quickened. It was no longer legend. It was destination. Yet with the clarity came fear. The jungle was merciless. Disease, predators, storms, even trained expeditions had failed. And he was no explorer, only an archivist with old boots and a fragile will. He stared at his reflection in the window, pale and uncertain. Am I enough? The doubt clawed at him. But then he remembered Ixchel's words once more. To see truth is a burden, but to ignore it is a betrayal. His hands curled into fists. He would not betray the truth. The following morning, Mateo visited the local market. He moved quietly among the stalls, buying a machete, a compass, dried food, rope, a waterproof pouch for the codex pages. The vendors looked at him with curiosity. The bookish man weighed down with gear like a soldier. He ignored their stares. Back in his apartment, he packed slowly, reverently, as though preparing for a pilgrimage. At the bottom of his bag, beneath the supplies, he placed the codex pages wrapped in cloth. His fingers lingered there, his chest tight with both terror and exhilaration. Night fell once more, and Mateo stood at his door with the pack on his shoulders. His eyes scanned the city one last time. The university towers loomed in the distance, their windows glowing with light, full of scholars who believed themselves keepers of truth. He almost laughed. They would not even notice he was gone. But one day, when the city of the sun's bones rose again, they would have no choice but to remember his name. Mateo stepped into the darkness, the codex whispering against his chest. The jungle was waiting. The jungle greeted him like a beast that did not want to be tamed. Heat pressed against his skin the moment he stepped off the village road, swallowing him in a wall of humidity that clung to every breath. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, alive with the chorus of unseen creatures. Mateo adjusted the straps of his pack, the codex notes resting close to his chest, and raised the machete. Each swing cut through vines that curled like snakes, each step deeper pulling him farther from the world of marble halls and mockery. He followed the rivers first. The codex had spoken of twin serpents, waterways that wound through the earth, before kissing each other near the Jaguar Mountain. The first river he found was thick and slow, its surface slick with green. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, biting at his neck, but he pressed on, muttering to himself the glyphs that described its bends and turns. At night, he camped on the bank, lighting small fires that sputtered in the damp air. He wrote in a journal by the flicker of flame, recording not just his path, but his fears. Halvorson's laughter follows me even here, he scribbled, but I cannot let his voice be louder than the codex. Ixchel would never forgive me if I turned back. Sleep came fitful. In the darkness, he dreamt of stone walls shimmering with sunlight, of voices chanting in a language that was both ancient and his own. He awoke with the codex pressed against his chest, as if protecting it from the world. The days blurred into sweat and struggle. He hacked through tangled roots, crossed streams with water up to his waist, and climbed ridges where the jungle floor disappeared beneath him. His boots blistered his feet, but the map in his mind burned brighter, with every step. Once, as he rested beneath a ceiba tree, he allowed himself to remember the life he had left behind the basement, the ridicule, the invisibility. He realized, with a surge of strange relief, that he no longer belonged to that world. The jungle, though cruel, treated him with a kind of respect. It tested him, yes, but it did not dismiss him. On the fourth day, he reached the second river. Narrower, faster, it rushed like a vein of silver through the green. His heart leapt as he compared its path to the Codex sketch. It matched. The serpents of water had been found. His breath caught as he traced where they would soon converge. Somewhere beyond lay the mountain. That night, as rain hammered his tarp and thunder rolled like drums of war, Mateo stared at the map again. Lightning lit up the forest, and for a heartbeat, he saw shapes in the trees, jaguars of shadow, watching. He clutched the Codex and whispered, "Guide me." By dawn, exhausted but driven, he pressed forward. The rivers joined at last in a violent embrace, frothing white where they collided. Beyond them, looming in the mist, rose the mountain, its ridges stretched like claws, its summit jagged like teeth. Mateo's pulse thundered in rhythm with the storm. It was no ordinary mountain. It crouched like a jaguar waiting to pounce. The Codex had not lied. His legs quivered, both from fatigue and awe. He sank to his knees at the water's edge, tears cutting paths through the dirt on his face. "I've found it," he whispered hoarsely. "Ixchel, I've found it." The jungle roared around him, alive and merciless. But Mateo felt only reverence. The city of the sun's bones was no longer a myth. It was waiting, hidden just beyond the jaguar's shadow, and he would not stop until its voice was heard again. The climb up the jaguar mountain tested every fiber of Mateo's will. The jungle grew thicker as he ascended, as if the mountain itself resisted his approach. Vines coiled around his legs, thorns clawed at his arms, and insects swarmed his every step. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he refused to falter. The Codex had led him here, and with each labored breath, he felt Ixchel's voice urging him onward. By midday, he reached a plateau where the canopy opened and sunlight poured through like molten gold. From that height, he saw the rivers winding below, their silver bodies twisting exactly as the glyphs had promised. For the first time since leaving the city, he allowed himself a weary smile. He was close. The air grew unnaturally still as he pressed deeper into the plateau. Birds fell silent, and even the cicadas seemed to retreat. A hush blanketed the forest, broken only by the sound of his boots crunching against stone. Then, beneath the ferns and roots, he saw it. A step, carved stone, weathered and cracked, but unmistakable. His breath hitched. He pushed aside vines, his heart hammering, and more steps revealed themselves, ascending in a long, broken staircase that vanished into the mist. With trembling hands, he brushed moss from the carvings. Glyphs. Real, living glyphs. Not the ones mocked in lecture halls. They glimmered faintly under the touch of sunlight. "Kin Bak'al," he whispered. His throat ached with emotion. "You're real." He climbed the staircase, each step heavier with awe. The jungle tried to reclaim the stones, but the outline of walls and pillars grew clearer. As the mist thinned, a vast expanse unfolded before him. The forgotten city emerged from the green. Ruins stretched across the plateau, towering pyramids fractured by centuries, plazas swallowed by roots, and temples half buried in earth. But even through ruin, their magnificence burned. And there, shimmering through cracks and carvings, Mateo saw it. Streaks of gold. Not scattered ornaments, not trinkets, but foundations and walls lined with it. The sun itself seemed to bleed from the stones, igniting the city with an otherworldly glow. Mateo fell to his knees, overwhelmed. Tears blurred his vision. All his life of invisibility, of ridicule, of silence, it had led to this. His chest heaved as he pressed his hands to the ground, whispering a prayer not to God or professors, but to the ancestors who had hidden Kin Bak'al for so long. The city answered in silence. its golden bones gleaming with dignity, as though it had been waiting for him and him alone. He stumbled forward into the plaza, tracing glyphs carved into walls, running his fingers over golden inlays that glimmered even beneath centuries of dirt. His mind spun with possibilities. This was not just treasure, it was proof. Proof that the Mayans' greatness had been more than myth, proof that the professor's arrogance had blinded them, proof that the voices of the forgotten still thundered across time. But exhilaration quickly twisted into dread. He realized the danger of what he held. If word reached the outside world too quickly, the city would not remain sacred. Treasure hunters, corporations, governments, they would strip it bare, grind it into profit. Kin Bak'al would become spectacle, not sanctuary. Matteo sank onto a stone bench, his thoughts heavy. He remembered Halvorson's sneer, the jeers of the students. They would mock him still, until he forced them to see. But would that mean destroying the very thing he loved? He stared across the golden city, his heart divided. One part burned with triumph, the other trembled with the weight of choice. For now, he chose silence. He would guard the city as Ixchel had guarded its memory. The time to reveal it would come, but not yet. Not until he knew it would be respected, not ravaged. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the ruins of Kin Bak'al blazed with firelight, as though the bones of the sun themselves had awakened. Matteo whispered into the wind, "They laughed at me, but the city sings to me, and one day, the world will listen." News traveled faster than Matteo could have imagined. He had returned weeks later, his clothes ragged, his body thinned by the jungle, but his eyes alight with fire. He brought photographs blurred, yes, but undeniable. Golden veins etched into stone walls, glyphs gleaming under filtered sun, the Jaguar Mountain looming in the background. His trembling hands delivered them to the university board, expecting silence, perhaps rejection. Instead, the room erupted. Halvorson was there, of course, his smirk sharp as ever. He leaned back in his chair as the photographs were passed around. "Fabrications," he declared. "Tricks of light. Our basement clerk has discovered photography filters." A ripple of laughter stirred, but it was uneasy this time, not confident. The evidence glowed too brightly to ignore. Matteo stood in the center of the room, his voice steady, though his chest burned. "I found Kin Bak'al. The Codex led me. I walked the steps, touched the walls. This is real. Dismiss me if you wish, but the truth no longer needs your permission." The board members exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "Professor Halvorson, these glyphs, they match known inscriptions. Even the erosion patterns look authentic." "Surely you must admit—" "I admit nothing," Halvorson snapped. But there was a tremor beneath his bluster. His eyes darted to the images again, lingering longer than he intended. Then came the journalists. Headlines screamed of a forgotten Mayan city, shimmering with gold. Scholars who once ignored Matteo now clamored for interviews. Students who had mocked him whispered his name in awe. The man who had been invisible, who had lived among dust and silence, was suddenly the center of the world's gaze. Halvorson's empire of arrogance began to crumble. Invitations to speak once flowed to him like wine, but now they trickled to nothing. The same board that had once applauded his disdain now questioned his judgment. Matteo, the archivist no one respected, was the name on their lips. At the first press conference, cameras flashed as Matteo stepped to the podium. His voice shook at first, but the weight of the city steadied him. "Kin Bak'al is not merely treasure," he told the world. "It is testimony. The ancestors carved their truth into stone, and we must listen with humility. Gold will tempt us, but reverence must guide us." The hall fell silent, the kind of silence that follows revelation. Matteo felt Ixchel's presence beside him, her whisper echoing through his heart. "You have opened the door." Halvorson, lurking at the edge of the room, could only watch. His pride was a mask cracking under the force of truth. Students avoided his lectures. Colleagues no longer sought his approval. The man who had once ridiculed dreams now lived in the shadow of the very dream he denied. And Matteo, once a shadow himself, now stood in light he had never sought but had earned. When he walked the campus, heads turned. Some bowed slightly, others met his gaze with reverence. He felt no triumph in their stares, only the weight of responsibility. For Kin Bak'al was fragile, and its survival depended on more than discovery. Late at night, alone in his apartment, Matteo unwrapped the codex once more. Its pages were even more fragile now, the fibers nearly crumbling in his hands. He whispered to it, not as a scholar but as a son to his ancestors. They laughed, but you spoke. They doubted, but you endured. I will protect you, I swear it. The world had been silenced. The arrogant had been humbled. And the forgotten voices of Kin Bak'al were singing again. Months passed. The frenzy of headlines dulled, though their echoes still lingered in lecture halls and newsrooms. The world had shifted, but Matteo's life returned, in many ways, to its quiet rhythm. He had refused expeditions funded by corporations eager to strip Kin Bak'al bare. He had rejected offers from governments who saw only wealth and power in the ruins. Instead, he sat once more in the museum basement, among the dust and shadows, as though nothing had changed, except that now, the silence felt like choice, not exile. The professors who once laughed now lowered their voices when they spoke his name. Some avoided him entirely, ashamed of their cruelty. Others tried awkwardly to align themselves with his discovery, offering belated praise. Matteo accepted neither their silence nor their flattery. He did not need their approval. The city had spoken for him. Halverson's downfall was quieter, but more painful to watch. He still lectured, still carried himself with the same booming voice, but the halls were half empty. Students no longer sought his approval. They whispered of his arrogance, his blindness. For all his knowledge, he had failed the simplest test, humility. Matteo pitied him, though the wound he carried from that night of mockery would never fully heal. Sometimes, alone at his desk, Matteo would close his eyes and return in memory to the jungle. He could still feel the weight of the air, hear the hiss of the rivers, see the ruins blazing gold under the setting sun. Kin Bak'al had not left him. It lived inside him, whispering in dreams, urging patience. He visited the village near the Jaguar Mountain once more, bringing offerings of maize and cacao to the elders. They listened in silence as he told them what the city had revealed. When he finished, one elder laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "You were not the first to see, but you were the first to remember." The words burned into his heart like a blessing. Back in the city, journalists still knocked on his door, hungry for updates. He answered little. Some accused him of secrecy, of arrogance now himself. But Matteo knew the truth. The city was not his to give away. Kin Bak'al belonged to the ancestors who built it, and it would survive only if guarded with reverence, not greed. One evening, he sat with the codex spread before him, its pages fragile as moth wings. The glyphs shimmered faintly under the lamplight. He thought of Ixchel, of her voice in the firelight, of her patient insistence that forgotten things still breathed. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "I kept my promise. I listened." He leaned back, the city's glow alive in his memory. The lesson was clear now, etched deeper than any glyph. True treasure was not the gold that lined the stones, nor the fame that followed discovery. True treasure was humility, the willingness to listen when others mocked, to believe when others doubted, to honor voices the world had silenced. Matteo closed the codex gently, reverently, as if tucking a child into sleep. Outside, the city lights flickered, but he felt the jungle in his bones. Kin Bak'al was waiting, as it always had, as it always would, until the world was ready. He rose, steady, carrying both the burden and the gift of truth. His life was no longer invisible. He had become the archivist who remembered. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. And with that, Matteo's journey from silence to revelation, from mockery to reverence, came to rest. Not in gold, but in the unyielding lesson that only humility can unlock the voices of the forgotten.